This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Rebecca Larson, and I'm very, very happy to welcome back again my dear friend, Sharon Bennett Connolly. Welcome.
Thank you, Rebecca. Nice to be here again.
I love having our it's like little girlfriend chats about history, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to have you back again because I thought there is one woman in history who I have never, ever done a podcast on. I've never written an article about. I've never had a guest article about her. And it's about time that we bring forward Katherine Swynford. And I was so excited that you're able to talk about her today. Yay.
I can't believe you haven't done anything on her before.
I can't.
Shame on you.
I know. I feel like, when it comes to the medieval history, that's not usually like when publishers reach out to me, they reach out to me about Tudor stuff. That's because they think that that's all that I do. So it's so seldom that I get a book sent to me about medieval history.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of been intrigued by her. But yeah, I also can't believe I've never done some digging to find somebody to do an episode on her. And then I discovered that you can talk on her. And I thought, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah, she was in my first book, Heroines of the Medieval World. Can't remember if it was Mistresses or Scandalous Heroines, but yeah, she's an interesting character. And of course, I live just up the road from Lincoln and Kettlethorpe, which is where she lived. Kettlethorpe is where she lived with her first husband, Hugh Swynford. And she's buried in Lincoln. She died in Lincoln and she's buried in Lincoln Cathedral. And it's also where she married John of Gaunt.
Oh, now we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Spoiler
No,
alert.
we are. But just to let you know where the links are and why I've looked into her so much. Because, she's a bit of a heroine around here.
Well, I'm excited to learn all about her today. I told Sharon, I was like, I opened Wikipedia, scanned it, but I've also learned when it comes to Wikipedia, take it with a grain of salt because most of the time it's incorrect. And I didn't look at the sources on there. So I figured, let's go to the expert on Katherine today, and that's you. And let's just start from the beginning. Like, where did she come from?
Well, her family are from Hainault. Her father, Pain de Roe, was in the service of Philippa of Hainault and came over with Philippa when she married Edward III. And Catherine and her sister Philippa were raised in Philippa of Hainault's household.
Oh, wow. So close to the royal family from the get-go.
Oh, yes. And they had many advantages in that they were raised by Philippa. And of course, Catherine's sister, Philippa, actually married Geoffrey Chaucer.
Oh,
the father of English literature.
Wow. That's a cool connection.
It isn't it? And he was in John of Gaunt's household, Chaucer, and wrote a book, the Book of the Duchess, about John of Gaunt's first wife, Blanche of Lancaster.
Okay. Wow, cool connections. All right, so she's at court. She is at the court of Edward III. At what point, I guess, does she have a marriage arranged for her, or does she get married? I guess I don't know how that quite worked out.
Well, it's arranged for her, and it was the mid-1360s, before 1367, but we don't actually have an exact date. She was a minor noble, so nobody's going to write down when she was born, which is still in dispute, and when she got married, until she actually comes to the attention of John of Gaunt. Dates are fuzzy.
Yeah, which makes sense.
So she was married to Sir Hugh Swynford of Kettlethorpe and Colby, which are two manors in Lincolnshire. And he was in the household of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster by right of his wife, Blanche of Lancaster. He had something like 5 earldoms, John of Gaunt. Let me see if I can remember. Lancaster, Leicester, Salisbury, Derby, and Lincoln.
Wow.
Greedy chap. But they'd been accumulated basically by Thomas of Lancaster in when he married Alistair Lacy in the early 1300s. So, and they'd passed down through the family, so that by Edward III had this idea of actually marrying his sons with noble heiresses. Then he didn't have to actually give them landed settlements. He just gave them an heiress. And John of Gaunt probably got the best one out of the lot in Blanche of Lancaster, because, like I say, 5 earldoms. The Duchy of Lancaster to this day still finances the King of England. It's his private income is the Duchy of Lancaster.
That's a big one.
So that's how loaded John of Gaunt was by marrying Blanche. But they were both, John and Blanche were only teenagers when they were married. He was about 16 or 17. She was 13 or 14. They'd married in 1359 when Blanche was 14 and John was 19. And they had something like 8 children in as many years. Poor Blanche seems to have spent her entire life from being a 14-year-old pregnant.
Wow.
Even given that, they only had 3 children survive infancy. Their eldest daughters, Philippa and Elizabeth, and then their son, Henry of Bolingbroke, who would later become Henry IV. But then Blanche died in 1360. I want to say 69, but I can never remember whether it's 68 or 69. Yeah, she died probably in childbirth. But there's a wonderful book that anyone who's interested in Katherine Swynford has read called Katherine by Anya Seton. And she wrote that Blanche had died of plague. And that seems to have stuck. But she died in childbirth at Tutbury Castle, and John of Gaunt was with her. Now, Catherine was made governess to Blanche and John's surviving daughters, Elizabeth and Philippa. And her own daughter, also named Blanche, who was John of Gaunt was her godfather, was raised alongside Gaunt's 2 daughters. So she was very much a part of Blanche and John's household from the early days.
So there's so much close proximity here. It makes you wonder, like, how many times Catherine and John of Gaunt ran into each other and how early this love affair started.
Yeah, well, we can't say for certain when it started. What we can say is that John and Blanche were very, very close. 8 children in 8 years of marriage is like they were constantly with each other as much as possible. So I don't think, and this is just my opinion, it started until after Blanche died. And of course, Catherine was married to Hugh Swynford, and she was herself having children. She had at least 3 children by Hugh Swynford before his death in 1371. So it seems unlikely that the relationship started before 1371. Now, Hugh died towards the end of 1371, and in October, I think it was 1371, John of Gaunt married again. He married Constance of Castile, who was the daughter of the rather colourful chap known as Pedro, King of Castile. Depending on whether you liked him or not, he was either Pedro the Cruel or Pedro the Just. Oh. And he was murdered by his brother, Enrique of Trastamara, who then became King of Castile. His 2 daughters had been sent to the English lands in Gascony and Aquitaine for safety, whilst the war in Castile was raging. And after Pedro's death, and Blanche's death, John decided to marry Constance, which also gave him a claim to the kingdom of Castile, because Constance was Pedro's heir. So it was very much the second marriage. The first marriage gave John lands. The second marriage was very much a dynastic marriage for John to claim a kingdom. You know, he was a third surviving son of Edward III. He wasn't supposed to have a kingdom, but if he could claim a kingdom for his wife, then, you know, nobody's going to complain at that. He didn't manage to do it in the end, but his and Constance's daughter, Catalina, did marry I can't remember if it's the son or grandson of Enrique Trastamara. So she became Queen of Castile.
Oh, that's cool.
And she's the grandmother or the great grandmother of Catherine of Aragon.
Okay. All right. There's the connections.
Yeah. So, yes, there's your Tudor connections for you, just to give relevance to why we're talking about this. Because, of course, I mean, John of Gaunt and Katherine Swynford are actually the ancestors of all the Tudors.
Wow, that's a really cool fact.
And of both Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon as well, you know, which is quite a feat.
Yeah, I feel like when we talk about Henry VII, of course, we always go back to that Beaufort line, which is where that connection to these two comes.
Yeah.
I don't want to skip ahead because I feel like that's when things start to really get interesting in the relationship. But maybe let's move forward a little bit to the relationship. You know, let's say John of Gaunt's second wife dies. Katherine Swynford's husband is now dead as well. Like, what happens? How long do we have any idea of how long it took before there was documentation showing that there was something going on between these two?
It seems that shortly after John married Constance of Castile, there is evidence of the relationship between John and Katherine Swynford. So probably after Hugh's death.
Okay.
Catherine and John got close. Like I say, the marriage with Constance was a marriage of dynasty and convenience. I hate to say it for the sake of Constance, you know, but it doesn't seem to have been a marriage of affection, certainly on John's part.
So it was different than his first marriage.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Constance, they did have children. Constance gave birth to a daughter, Catherine, Catalina, in 1373, and a son, John, in 1374. But John died as an infant. Catherine and John had children. They had 4 children. John, which I think is ironic, you know, he's called John. He had sons with his first wife called John, son with his second wife called John, who didn't survive, and a son with his mistress called John, who did survive. And Henry and Thomas, and then a daughter called Joan. And all these children were born between 1372 and 1378 or 1379 for Joan. So it's like Catherine's son by John, called John, was born at about the same time as Constance's son called John. And I can't help but feel sorry for Constance. You know, I mean, she wouldn't have, I doubt she expected a marriage of love. But for him to be producing 4 illegitimate children with his mistress while he's having children with her is a bit on the dodgy side.
I honestly, I can't even imagine what it was like to live during that time and to be a woman. And I'm sure Constance didn't expect it to be a love match, but I'm sure, like, when she secretly kind of hope it could be.
Well,
And
you'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, she's still a young woman, you know, she's a young woman herself. She knows she's been raised to have a dynastic marriage, but she'd hope he was faithful for at least some of the time.
yeah.
I mean, in the early, you know, you'd expect it in the early years, and then maybe later they all both went their separate ways when as heir had been born, sort of thing. But he was carrying on with Catherine at the same time as having children with Constance.
Wow. Okay, so help me understand. Is there like any contemporary record of how Katherine Swynford was described? Or do we only know later on, maybe her appearance, her personality, any of that?
Not a lot. We have criticism of her as a woman who, you know, was a mistress to a prince sort of thing. But you
Yeah.
don't often get descriptions of people, of women in particular. We do for Blanche because of Chaucer's Book of the Duchess, although he very flatteringly said that she had a long white neck.
Oh, it's so different.
Like,
Like
gee, thanks. It's
that's
my neck, you know.
that's the best you could do out of everything. You chose
Yeah,
my neck to
exactly.
It sounds like she wasn't very attractive. All he could find was her neck to compliment. I
And
asked,
she probably was attractive, but she had a nice neck.
that's so funny. It was how different. I
Poor
assume
Blanche.
like Katherine Swynford must have been a beauty, to
I would
grab
have
the eye.
thought so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly physically and sensually attractive to not just to catch the eye of John of Gaunt, but to keep it.
Yeah.
You know, their relationship in the end lasted 25 years.
Ah, that's
You know,
amazing.
there were ups and downs, but yeah, in like a quarter of a century.
Wow.
Um, it's not bad going, is it? So, and four
No.
children, you know, he could have, when he was told at one stage during the Peasants' Revolt, he was criticised for keeping a mistress and forced to put Catherine aside. You know, sent her to her lands in Lincolnshire, out of the public eye, and supposedly having abandoned, you know, like I say, set her aside. But he's still getting kept in contact with her, and she still kept horses in his stables at Kenilworth Castle and Tutbury, and she and their youngest daughter Joan joined the household of Henry of Bolingbroke, who was Earl of Derby by that point, and his new wife Mary de Bohun. So he may have officially discarded her, but he definitely kept her close.
Was it unusual at all to have the children of an affair be part of a royal household?
No, it was actually considered totally acceptable for, and you know, the man recognized his illegitimate offspring as well as legitimate offspring, and made provision for them. It's just the sign of a good man. You know, men were expected. They didn't have the constraints of fidelity that we would expect them to have these days. You know, they were seen, because marriages were dynastic, it was expected that they would do their duty by their wives. Horrible saying, but find their happiness and pleasure elsewhere.
Mm.
So illegitimate children were part of the course, and it was a sign of how noble you were if you actually made provision for them.
Yeah. Okay, so how long was it that she was his mistress before Constance died? I'm trying to make sure I keep all these names right. These are all so new to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't know exactly when the affair started, probably sometime around 1371, 1372. The first child was born in 1373. So certainly by end of 1372. John was making provision for Catherine in 1372. He gave her the manor of Gringley, which is, if you just go out my door, turn left, then left again, go straight on, and there's Grinley on the hill. And I actually met the lady who lives in the manor house there that would have been Catherine's manor house at Grinley a few years ago. And she was ever
Wow.
so happy that she'd got that history there. So yeah, lands in Wheatley as well. So he made provision for, interestingly, he made provision for her. I mean, I live in North Nottinghamshire, and which is right next door to Lincolnshire. So he made provision for her in close proximity to the lands that she held from her husband until her son was old enough to inherit. So, it was, and he made gifts to her and things like that, all from 1372 onwards. So I think spring 1372, there was probably love in the air.
Okay. Yeah.
And like I say, all through the 1370s, I think Joan was born 1378, 1379. So they were, and then you had the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. Yeah, 1381. So when John was forced to set her aside. So yeah, that first, all the time of Constance's marriage, the first 10 years of his marriage to Constance, he was also with Catherine.
Hmm. I feel bad for Constance for that.
Yeah, me too. And that must have taken some juggling as well. You know,
I can't.
you've got kids by both of them at the same time.
I was like, how do you keep the kids straight? Imagine if it were, if it were modern day and you had all these kids and they were all in part in activities and sports and all the different things you'd have to take them to. Imagine John of Gaunt trying to keep track of his kids and which soccer games he'd have to go to.
Yeah, and he's also got the kids by Blanche, the two girls, Philippa and Elizabeth, who Catherine is officially their governess. His son, Henry of Bolingbroke, the future Henry IV, who he's got to train to be a knight and, is raising at the same time. Extended family doesn't quite cover it, does
No,
it?
it doesn't. I'm just so blown away. It seems like, especially when you look at Edward III, like all the children he had, all the sons that he had, and then you have his own kids, like having all of these children too. Like,
Yeah.
is everyone in England related to Edward III one way or another?
Statistically, we're all descended from Edward III. Whether or not we are in actual fact, but statistically we are. But I think what's interesting about John of Gaunt is, excepting Catalina, because you don't see a lot about her in the records, his children by Blanche, particularly Henry, are close. One of Henry's closest friends, who served in his household, is Thomas Swynford, Catherine's son, by Sir Hugh. And he was very close to Catherine. He actually, when he becomes king, he actually refers to her as my lady, the king's mother.
Wow.
And, John and Thomas, who were Catherine and John of Gaunt's sons, are favoured by Henry IV. Henry, the other son, he joins the church and rises to be Bishop of Winchester and Cardinal. So they all benefit from being John of Gaunt's children.
Yeah.
And the relationship between Henry and them seems to have been a strong bond. And I suppose the benefit for Henry is they're brothers. But those brothers have no claim to the throne.
Right.
So they can serve him without having any political leverage over him.
Yeah. Oh God. Just seems like it could be so complicated.
Yeah.
My brain is exploding over here already, trying to keep track of everybody.
I wouldn't mind being a fly on the wall at one of their Christmas dinners.
I can't even imagine. It seems like it would be a pretty noisy room, probably.
Yeah. And I can imagine Constance going, well, if Catherine's there, I'm going somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not feeling very well today. I don't think I'm going to stay at the
Yeah.
dinner very long.
Yeah.
So, speaking of Constance, what year did she die? And was it natural causes or was she poisoned? I'm just going to ask that.
There's no reference to her being poisoned. She died in 1394. And yeah, it just seems to be natural causes. Her sister Isabella died within a couple of years of her as well.
Oh,
So there's
wow.
no reference to a child being born or anything, which is sometimes what is
Yeah.
covered. So I'm not sure what Constance died of, but I wouldn't have thought. I think by, 20 years of being in a relationship with John, I doubt Catherine would turn around and say, actually, let's get rid of Constance.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'd have been her, I'd have done it sooner.
I was going to say, yeah, 20 years is a long time. So who knows? Unfortunately, she dies, but this now opens up the possibility for John of Gaunt to wed his mistress. And it seems like this was a pretty scandalous thing for him to do.
Yeah, the chroniclers don't like it, and it's like, she gets the blame for it. She's hooked him, and um, you know, um, I think it was very calculating of John of Gaunt. Actually, I don't. He probably did it to some extent for love, but I think mainly he did it for dynastic reasons.
Mm.
So Catherine and John had been, like I said, they'd been split up in 1381, but Catherine was still, she went to Lincolnshire for a while, and then you find her in the household of Henry when he and Mary start having children. And she even finances, John makes an expedition to Spain to claim the crown of Castile. And one of the people financing him is Katherine Swynford.
Oh,
So she's financing him and Constance to go over to Spain to try and claim the throne. And in the end, like I say, a deal is made where their daughter Catherine marries the grandson of Enrique of Trastamara, and so she will become Queen of Castile. So he's sort of won. He's not wearing the crown, but at least his descendants will.
yeah.
So then he's back in England, and like you say, Constance dies in 1394, and in January 1396, John and Catherine marry at Lincoln Cathedral. I think it was at Lincoln to be out of the way of everybody, to just get it done without too many people looking over their shoulder and, anyone here got a reason why they shouldn't wed? And an entire crowd going, yeah, he's a prince and she isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
But for practicality wise, he had 3 sons and a daughter who were all illegitimate. Joan had been married at the 12 or 13 and had 2 young children, 2 young daughters, and would be widowed at the age of 15, 16.
Wow.
She married a minor baron because she was an illegitimate daughter.
Mm.
In John marrying Catherine, he could then apply to the Pope to have the children legitimised because the parents are now married, so the children, they can be legitimised. And the Pope agrees to this and sends a bull legitimising them, which arrives in September 1396. And suddenly, Joan has gone from the illegitimate daughter of a prince to the legitimate daughter of a prince and the legitimate granddaughter of a king of England. So her marriage prospects improve exponentially. And she's married to Ralph Neville, the Earl of Westmoreland.
Mm.
And she has another 14 children. I think she ends up with 16 altogether.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
Her daughter by her first husband marries the Earl of Westmoreland's son by his first wife. So to keep things in the family even more complicated.
Yes.
But, the Henry, who joined the church as a child, could not rise to become a bishop or a cardinal if he was illegitimate.
Mm.
So legitimizing him increased his prospects in the church and meant that he could rise as high as he wanted, or as high as the king wanted, and having a half brother in the church never hurts any king, especially if they're on his side. So, and then John Beaufort could become Earl of Somerset, and Thomas is an interesting one. The youngest son, he becomes a soldier, and he's a career soldier. And he is very much Nathan Amin's book, The House of Beaufort. I came away from that with Thomas Beaufort's my favourite. He never marries, he never has kids, he just fights. He fights in the 100 Years' War. He doesn't look for reward or anything. He's just a career soldier and gets on with things. So they are a fascinating bunch, the four kids. Like I say, Joan, as a result of being legitimized, she is basically the grandmother of most of the combatants in the Wars of the Roses on both sides.
Wow.
Her husband, Ralph Neville, and her, they have 14 kids, and the daughters marry the Dukes of Buckingham, York, and Norfolk. And there's Cardinal Thomas Bourchier. That's the wrong line. That's the sister of the Duke of York, the Bourchier family. They're related to everybody as well. So even when they, if they've cousins, because Cecily's married into the House of York, Catherine's married into the House of Norfolk, and Anne married the Duke of Buckingham. That basically there's this spider's web around the crown of all these Nevilles and Beauforts, all interlinked, which is why they call it the Cousins' War.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how, thanks to Joan's marriage and her large brood of children, everybody's related to everybody.
Yeah. Let's keep it in the family.
Yeah.
I feel like, help me understand their legitimacy, because I feel like, and I might be mistaken, but I feel like I've read before that they were declared legitimate by the Pope. However, other people maybe didn't want to see them that way.
Yes, they were declared legitimate by the Pope in 1396, September 1396. And then there was a bull brought before, a act brought before Parliament by Richard II to confirm their legitimacy, which happened in about, I think it was January 1397. So all's well and good. Then Henry IV comes to the throne, and there's another act of Parliament, or the Act of Parliament is reviewed again, and there's somebody inserts saving the royal dignity, but it's inserted. It's not in the actual act. It's like somebody's put, a little arrow and written above, saving the royal dignity. So a few historians have suggested that this was somebody trying to exclude the Beauforts from the succession.
Yeah.
But actually doing it illegal. It's not illegal. It's just somebody doing it and hoping everybody will go, oh no, that's all right. It said saving the royal dignity. They're not allowed. And it's just like somebody's actually written that in, whether or not whether or not the act was written wrong and they forgot to put it in, or somebody's just inserted it to try and exclude them from the throne, is unclear. But at the same time, the Pope has actually issued a papal bull declaring them legitimate. Richard II has done the same as an act of parliament. And there is a question as to whether you can exclude somebody if the Pope and the King have said they're legitimate. Can you then turn around and say, well, actually, you are legitimate, but no, you can't have the crown. It's like, but I'm legitimate.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now I got to quiz you here a little bit, because here we are now in modern day, right? With the issues with Andrew. Is Andrew still in the line of succession?
He is, yes.
Oh, so they have kept him in there. That's interesting.
At the minute, I think they're going to try and take him out of it. And to be fair, it's very unlikely ever to become a question.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people in front of him. But then there was that incident in, was it Thailand a few years ago, where one of the royal family went mad and killed everybody else and tried to kill himself, shot himself in the head, but didn't quite succeed. And he was the heir by that point. He'd killed everybody else. So he was technically king for the couple of days he lived until he actually succumbed to his injuries.
Oh,
so technically, if something strange happened, stranger things have happened.
I've never heard that story before. That's crazy. But I was trying to compare it, right, to give us an idea. Has this ever happened before? The line of succession. I think it's so interesting because, like I said earlier, when we get to Henry VII, it's always like, well, they're still considered the illegitimate line. He didn't have a right to the throne, but really he did. It was just like this asterisk in the law.
He had the right to the throne as much as William the Conqueror did anyway.
Yeah.
By right of conquest, as much as Edward IV did. But all three of them won the crown in battle.
True.
And right of conquest is a valid way to get the crown.
Yes, it is. Okay, let's go back to Katherine Swynford. And as the wife of John of Gaunt, what was her role? Do we have any record of anything that she did that stands out?
Not particularly, but she was after the death of Anne of Bohemia, Richard II's queen, until the arrival of Isabella of Valois, his second wife, who was only a child, poor girl.
Yeah.
Catherine was actually the first lady of the realm.
Wow, what an ascent she had, huh?
How's that for you, for a rise? To go from bottom, a mistress, to first lady of the land, as the wife of John of Gaunt, who's technically sometimes Richard II's heir. So, and he was the duke in the land, so she, as Duchess, after Catherine of Bohemia, after Anne of Bohemia died in 1397, I think it was, Catherine was the person to talk to seek for an intercession with the king, because she was the first lady of the land.
And when it came to like ceremonies and stuff like that, did she also have a prominent place there?
Yeah, well, when they do things like the jousts during the Order of the Garter celebrations, King's birthday celebrations, anytime they had jousting, it would have been Catherine who would have sat as the lady, offering her kerchief as a token to knights and things. So she would have been the one who people would have sent their daughters to for a place in her household because there was no Queen's household. So the next senior household was Catherine's. So if you wanted your daughter to advance to learn how to be a lady in waiting, to meet an eligible young knight, it would have been Catherine's household, would have been the senior household in the country.
So she didn't have like this negative story around her, basically, that, she used to be John's mistress and now she's his wife. We don't want to send our daughters to her.
Well, she did have, but John of Gaunt was Duke of Lancaster. And he was one of the most prominent men in the kingdom. So it's like, I suppose it's like Queen Camilla today. You have to take the person as they are now. It doesn't matter what happened in her past, what she did in the past. It's the position she holds now.
That's fair. I'm glad to hear that, at least for her.
I suppose people would have talked behind their hands and things, but at the same time, there's not much you can say when she's Duchess of Lancaster. What is it? Duchess of Lancaster, Countess of Lincoln, Salisbury, Derby, and I've done it again.
There's a lot of them. If you're not watching, Sharon's counting on her fingers right now.
I know there's 5. Every time I do it, I know there's 5, and I always, the number of times I've done it and I've missed some. So yeah, it's Salisbury.
There we go. There we go. Okay, so let's keep moving through. So now, I mean, we're at least in the late 1390s at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know when she dies. I don't know when John of Gaunt dies. So let's look at maybe the final years.
Yeah, well, John of Gaunt died in 1399. So they only actually had 3 years of marriage.
Ugh.
Which, after all that, to finally marry and then only have 3 years of marriage. And they weren't necessarily, I mean, as a couple, they were probably happy years, but they were fraught years. Because Richard II had lost his first wife, and that seems to have been the point where that basically pushed him over the edge. He accused John of Gaunt of trying to kill him at various stages, of trying to steal his crown. And he and Henry, John of Gaunt's son by Blanche, and his heir, did not get on. They were contemporaries. There were only a few months between Richard II and Henry of Bolingbroke. But they have very different upbringings. Henry was a champion jouster. He got to take part in tournaments. He'd been on crusade. He'd been on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He had 4 boys and 2 girls in the nursery. Although he'd lost his wife, he had the children. His youngest daughter, who Mary was giving birth to when she died, survived. So he's got a nursery full of 4 robust boys. Richard II had no children. So everything Henry was, Richard wasn't. And Richard was one thing, though. He was king. And he used the kingship and his position as king to exile Henry from England for 10 years. Henry had an argument with another noble, with another baron, and they decided to settle it by feat of arms. And just as they were about to fight, Richard stopped it and exiled the one nobleman for life and Henry for 10 years. And that was in 1398. So Henry left. And unfortunately for Richard, rather than going quietly, he went to the court of the King of France and was welcomed and celebrated and entertained nobly by the King of France. Well, at the same time, Richard's just married the King of France's daughter, so he's upset. So he's writing to the
Oh
King of
no.
France, this isn't on, it's not fair. He's my enemy. So Henry, they have to tone it down a bit. But then John of Gaunt dies in 1399. And rather than repealing Henry's sentence of exile, he extends it and says, right, that's it. You're exiled for life. And I'm confiscating all the Lancaster lands.
Uh-oh.
So he's basically stolen Henry's inheritance. Henry was worried about this anyway, and he'd had to leave his sons in Richard II's care. His eldest son, Henry, the future Henry V, had been left with Richard II. He'd taken one of the younger sons, I think it was Thomas, with him, just to make sure that at least not all of them were in Richard's control.
Oh.
So then he's suddenly, exiled for life, all his income taken from him because all his dad was sending him allowances from the Lancaster lands and from his own lands of Hereford, which he'd inherited from his wife Mary. So Henry, rather than sitting back and going, oh, well, that's that then, never mind, okay, I'll think of something to do, he actually decides he's going to sail to England, land in Yorkshire and claim he's coming to recover his family lands and property, and basically overthrows Richard II. Now, what is interesting is that I always thought that he had come to claim the crown, or that he decided he was going to claim the crown halfway between York and London. But it wasn't necessarily going to be him who was king. When Richard was deposed, the throne was effectively vacant. And it took a few months before Parliament decided that Henry should be king. They looked at all the options. One of the main options was Henry's uncle, Edmund of Langley, Duke of York, who was technically Richard's heir. But they did eventually decide on Henry, and he became King of England. And like I say, with Catherine, he was very close to her and referred to her as my lady, the king's mother. And she spent the rest of her life. She retired to Lincoln. She stayed in Lincolnshire, and she lived a couple of houses in Lincoln. And she died in Lincoln, I think it was 1403. Let me just have a look. Yeah, on 10th of May, 1403. And she was buried in Lincoln Cathedral, where her son Henry was bishop.
Wow.
And then years later, when her daughter Joan dies, oh, this is hilarious. Joan's husband Ralph has this massive 3-person tomb built in Stainedrock Church, with his effigy on top, his first wife on one side, his second wife Joan on the other. His first wife's already buried elsewhere. He is buried in it. And then when Joan dies, she chooses to go and be buried next to her mum rather than him. So he's got this massive 3-person tomb and he's the only person in there.
Oh, that is funny. I assume when you go there, it's labeled as such. Like this is.
It is, yeah. It dominates the church, actually. I was there last week. And it dominates the church, this 3-person tomb. It's like, you can't miss it.
That's insane. Well, at least he has a tomb. There's so many people who don't, but it's a grander one than what he expected.
But he's all on his own in there.
Yeah.
But Joan's next to her mum in Lincoln Cathedral. So when you go to see Catherine, Joan's tomb is it's actually at the foot. They used to be side by side, but it's now at the foot of her mum's tomb. and is slightly smaller and slightly lower. They're not actually in them, as far as I know. They're buried in the ground underneath Lincoln Cathedral. Lincoln Cathedral doesn't have a crypt, so
Yeah.
burials are actually literally under the floor.
Wow. I love the history of England. Like I'm always so jealous. I even before we recorded too, I asked Sharon if she's like desensitized to the history around her and because she was just talking about how she was amazed by a place that she visited. And I was like, I just kept thinking like if I lived there, if I grew up there, seeing this stuff all the time, I would think when you walk into, let's say, a beautiful cathedral, that they all kind of look the same one way or another.
No, I've done York Minster and Lincoln Cathedral this week. They're both very different. They both have different atmospheres, and Lincoln is a lot. Although it's a touristy place, it's more off the tourist trail than York is. So it's quieter when you go in Lincoln Cathedral. You can look around and oh, I don't know. You just get a sense of history in both the places. I saw some different, every time I go, I see something different at both of them. You know, I spot something, I'm like, oh, right, yes. Or you see a book left out that's like 800 years old, and you're looking at it thinking, oh my God, the writing on it is exquisite.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Raby Castle. We had a wonderful tour of Raby Castle. By a lady named Marion, who gave us a little, she took us behind the scenes because I was with a tour group. We got a personal tour. The castle wasn't fully open to the public, so they were only doing private tours. And we got to go in the room that Cecily Neville grew up in and things like that, you know. And she pointed out some things that you wouldn't ordinarily see. But my favourite place at Raby Castle is the chapel, which is
Oh.
absolutely stunning. And there's 4 friezes on the back of Joan Beaufort, Ralph Neville, Cecily Neville, and I think I can't remember the Richard Duke of York and one other who's I can't remember, but I've got a photo of it because I'm like you know, you see everything through the camera lens. It's like just
Yes.
taking photos of everything, but the photo I had of Joan, I had a photo of that painting of Joan, but it wasn't very clear. It was on my old camera and it was
Mm.
fuzzy. So I've got a nice new pristine one I can use next time.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah,
good.
just to be in the chapel where Joan's children, all 14 of her Neville children, would have been baptized, and where perhaps Cecily and Richard Duke of York got married. You know, yeah, no, I will never tire of being in places where you can feel 600, 700 years worth of history.
Yeah. I'm so envious of that. Yeah, I enjoyed my time traveling around England when I was there, and I just felt like a giddy kid in a candy store walking into
Mm,
these places. I think the only cathedral that I went to was Exeter.
mm,
And even then, I feel like I always wanted to take so many pictures of things, but I also wanted to be very present in the moment
yes.
and to not forget. And it's so difficult to do when you know, like, I might never come back here. So I have to
Yeah,
make sure that I get some pictures.
it's hard, isn't it? Because I feel very lucky because I know I can go back. But when it's on your doorstep, you are less likely to go back because you've got all the time in the world to go back, so you don't do it.
Yeah.
Whereas with you, you've only got a limited time. Um, so it's like you try and soak it all
Yeah.
in one go. I mean, doing a tour this week with Australians and Americans and a Swede, it was like seeing our history, stuff I've seen time and time again through their eyes, and how their sense of history, because they haven't been able to physically see this before. Yeah, it was a revelation to see how they reacted.
Yeah. I was going to say, our this was something that people joked with me about how excitable Americans are when they come to the country and see these things. Would you say out of your group, the Americans were the most excitable?
No, the Australians were just as excitable.
Oh, good.
And
So,
yeah, and they all hopefully got a lot out of it because they really did take it in, and there was just question after question after question, which was great. But my voice by the end of it was like, oh God, I sounded like I'd had a good night on the beer. You know, when you get that thick voice.
it sounded like you had just smoked a pack of cigarettes.
Yeah. But it was incredible. We were walking, we'd went out one evening in York, and it was the 100th birthday of Queen Elizabeth II. And we walked out of the pub after dinner, and it was like the York Minster's bells are pealing. And they were just going and going and going. And it was like, oh, wow, let's walk up there. And we walked up there, and I actually filmed it. And it's on my Facebook page. And then you could hear the bells of the church next door were doing the same. And we're walking around York, and all the bells are ringing to celebrate Queen Elizabeth II's 100th birthday. And it was like, that is history. You know, the bells of churches that have been there for 900 years ringing to celebrate the 100th birthday of the Queen we all remember.
Yes.
It was something very special, and you know, and the sunset was absolutely stunning that night as well, just to make it even better.
I feel like I have this fascination with churches and cathedrals and abbeys, and even here in the States, I feel like the fascination that I have with churches and steeples is kind of the same. Like these were the tallest buildings around.
Yeah.
There weren't skyscrapers, you know, there weren't these huge buildings. It was the steeple that you would see before anything else.
Well, at the time that Katherine Swynford and John of Gaunt got married in Lincoln Cathedral, it was the tallest building in the world.
Wow.
It was taller than the Great Pyramid at Giza, because it had a tower and then a spire. Unfortunately, the spire then fell down.
Oh.
But for 300 years, it was the tallest building in the whole world.
That's amazing. I have this habit, and I don't know why. I just love to stand at the foot of the church and look up the steeple and imagine what it would have been like centuries ago, looking up at the height of it just in awe. And so when I go out, that's usually I take pictures of steeples all the time because I just there's something I'm just drawn to them. I can't tell you why. It's just a passion that I have. I just find them so interesting. Well, let's wrap this up here because I would love it if you could maybe, and it's probably an obvious answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What do you see as Katherine Swynford's legacy?